Hello, welcome, Pain Geeks. We're here again for December, giving you some chats and tips on how we are reading and how people within our community and perhaps voices that we look up to are approaching reading. So I am joined today by Mr. Tim Beams. Hello, sir.
I don't know where I fit in then. Just someone that fancy having a chat with.
Oh no, absolutely. I think it's been great being able to work with you over the last few years after sort of like looking up to people, looking up to you and like where you were and what you were doing. So it's nice to be able to get an insight into how you do things and how like peel back behind the curtain and see what's going on. That sounds all a bit weird, doesn't it? I need to
Yeah, I'd
stop.
have to put my screen down and then see really what's going on behind it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's too authentic. That's true.
Do that.
Would you like to introduce yourself, please, sir?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. My name's Tim Beams. I'm a physiotherapist who's got an interest in pain. I still work clinically for myself, seeing people with, I would call it persistent or complex pain, or complex and persistent pain states. And I'm the co-founder of Le Pub Scientifique and also of Pelvic Pain Matters. They're both organizations looking to, what are we trying to do? We're trying to rev up the world of pain and get people excited and connect everybody with the science, the researchers, the people in pain, and doing it in a way that is friendly. So there is so many similarities, isn't there, to the Pain Geeks? So yeah, I think that's me. I'm an educator as well, I guess, aren't I? So
Yeah.
do a bit of teaching around. Used to be a lot around, didn't it? Lots of traveling, but now it's mostly in my tracksuit bottoms. No, I have actually progressed now on teaching days. I'll put some trousers on and
That's good to know. Wicked.
yeah,
Brilliant. Thanks.
there we go. Thanks for having me.
What we're doing a little bit is sort of sharing tips on reading and putting together reading and how we approach reading. And so I have a few questions to ask you. So I'm going to run through them.
Yeah, cool.
So, first question. How do you balance all of the sort of necessary reading or reading new stuff or getting a breadth and across the evidence with like a clinical practice, a teaching practice, and a home life?
Yeah. So how do you do that? I mean, that's such a loaded question, isn't it? Because there's an assumption that you have to fill your life with reading. And I found it quite unhealthy at times. And so there are times in your life when you've got more space and you can put it in there. And then there are times when you can't, and something gives. And there are certain things that I'd rather give up, like reading at times, or types of, different type of reading as well, like, than at other times. So oh God, I could talk about this actually all afternoon, because I have different reading.
Yeah.
So I have like many different readings going on at the time. I don't listen well to stuff, so I can't really listen to podcasts. I'd rather watch, talk to someone or read something.
Yeah.
So if I'm preparing for a talk or to talk to a speaker, for instance, if we're running an event, then I'll look at some of their work. I scan stuff quite quickly, and then I might dive into it. And so, actually, it's such a small world, isn't it? I probably know most of their research now as well. So not all, but I know what they're doing or the direction that things are going most of the time. So, and then I have different I have what I would say is I have to study reading.
Yeah.
And sit down and take notes, and then I have reading that I'll do as pleasure. And then I have different pleasure reading. I Then I have like full on kind of geek
Yeah,
reading to popular science reading and philosophy, and then I have like and then novels.
yeah,
And then so like when I can't do any reading that it's too much, I'll still keep reading novels.
yeah.
So I read quite a lot actually. Probably, half an hour a day.
Yeah, but that's a really I'm really like glad that you sort of put a time frame on that, because I think there is this sort of assumption, or maybe there is this kind of like judgment, self-held judgment, that we should be doing so much a day, and especially those like um the January challenges are coming up, aren't they?
There
They
are, but let's be honest, there's one person who's influenced that for both of us.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I found that very unhealthy, actually. And I found it very difficult to reconcile how, like you said, how you fit that amount of reading into your life. And
Exactly. I think it's hard, like, I mean, I think the if you have the space to do so many hours a day, fantastic, and great. But I think they're having the flexibility to fit that in and to move that around life. And I think that's,
yeah,
it's equally from sort of some of our mentors that has come through as well. Like, there are more important things in life than, you know, just our jobs or what we're doing. And I think it's okay for us to be flexible with that without feeling like we're less than. And I think that's the bit that sometimes gets missed out. Like, it's admirable to make changes within your working routine in order to be more present with your family and with the things that are more important. Um, but it's also having a commitment means that you can recommit to it, right? So when life changes again, you can always recommit, and that it's fluid and flexible.
yeah,
Um, but there's no prescribed amount of time that somebody should be reading. I
no.
think the point is that we should be reading something, or we should be open to new knowledge. Maybe it's an attitude or a mindset rather than a sort of quantity.
Yeah, yeah. But not everybody is a reader. So
Yeah,
that's cool. And it's amazing now, isn't it, that you can get knowledge from so many different places. So
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I see like one thing, because both of us work for ourselves, don't we? And one thing that I see is some reading and some learning I see as my job.
Yeah,
So, and particularly if you're an educator, you have to do it. It's
yeah,
part of just keeping up to date and remaining, current. And
yeah,
um, but lots of my friends who are jobbing clinicians don't do anything beyond read a novel.
yeah,
And even I know some of them might be a holiday thing,
yeah.
because they've got life. Life is hard.
I think you make a really good point there. Like, but actually, clinical development and knowledge of your topic and your professional area is part of our job, but it has been left out of our time allotment to do our job. And that is a system problem. It's not an individual problem. The individual can still be motivated to do this and to get to go into reading and to want this stuff, but at the end of the day there just isn't space within the system, and so we need a system change that pays respect to that.
For our profession, because not all professions are the same as well.
No, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. So then I suppose if we have limited time, we have to figure out a way to decide what we read and why. So what sort of like filter process do you go through? You've already sort of told us a bit about that, but
Yeah. So, for instance, I'm seeing men with pelvic pain. So I'm doing a little bit of reading around that. So it's a really kind of an area that I'm learning. And
mhm.
I see that as me needing to spend a bit of time on. And I even got my anatomy books out today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a
Uh,
whole new world down there, Tim, right?
I know,
Like,
isn't it, Justin? Actually, Sarah Haag, if you're around, I was reading your book on incontinence this morning, so thanks,
oh
Sarah.
yeah.
Um, How do I so I have really specific areas that I'd explore, bless you,
Thank you.
areas that I'd explore, and related to teaching. What was the question?
Yeah, so like let's say you're like, okay, I've got an hour tomorrow, I want to read something. How would you decide what you're going to sit down with? Like, how would you make that
just
choice?
what projects are going on at the moment?
Yeah,
Yeah. So it
yeah.
needs to be really I need to be really time efficient.
Yeah, so like you don't not just going off in random directions, you're like, okay, I've got this, so I'm asking a question of this part of my clinical practice, and so I'm gonna look specifically for evidence that would either like bring this part of my practice into a new place or challenge my existing practice. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was looking at pudendal neuralgia this morning. So
Yeah.
I did a PubMed search.
Hmm.
I went through, I don't know, 100 abstracts, and of that, I pulled out one or two papers, of which I scanned one.
Right.
Then I got some other books out as well of people like Sarah Haag's book. It's next to me here. Here we go.
Yeah.
Haag's book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and then did a few other little searches on Google to see what sort of information the people would be getting about pudendal neuralgia. So that's how I organized myself this morning.
So that's quite a systematic approach, isn't it? Like that's like a literature review approach, right? That sort of you're gonna like, because I think that's something that I haven't done since I was in university. Really thinking about that, like that's a skill. Being
Okay,
able,
I would always do that then. So I am more organized than I thought I was.
you are right. This is why we need more of these chats. So I'm a bugger for like reference searches. So if I know there's a paper I like, or if I know there's a paper that's helped me on a particular topic, I'll go in there and look at their references, and then I'll start scanning from there and seeing what I want to read. It's terrible.
I never do that.
Oh.
I always, PubMed is my normal search engine, so I would open PubMed and I would just put in whatever search terms, maybe a person or a topic, and then I'd start exploring from there. And then you get sort of, I mean, if people haven't done this since at university, then you get a sense of who the different groups are that are interested in that area, and then you like go off in different. Anyway, I go off in different tangents from that.
Are you a fan of Boolean logic and mesh terms then, Tim Beams?
I didn't think so. I thought I was just chaotic in everything that I did, but I mean,
oh, here you go. You see, this is how the system gets you.
damn.
But I think these are the kind of skills, right? So if you're interested in a topic, knowing how to use Boolean symbols, right? So that's like and, or, and then limiting the word to its stem. So physiotherapy would become physio, so that you would catch all things. So like walking, you would reduce down to walk. These are techniques, right? These are literature searching techniques that not everybody has access to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I'm as brilliant or efficient, but and using and or and all sorts. Yeah, that's what I would tend to put into a search. So
Yeah, cool. And then so you found, let's say for example, you found something on pudendal neuralgia, and you've done a bit of the anatomical.
You never know, ain't it?
Yeah, you've done a bit of like you've been looking at the anatomy, and you've got a sense of the pathology or the current narrative on the pathology. What what would you be looking for in a paper that would move your, like, are you looking for like, would you be going to like large data, or would you be going to qualitative work? What would you be asking of the paper for it to inform you in a new way? So how did you choose that?
Okay, yeah. I guess so. I'm only talking about this morning because it's most current. So thinking of what I was doing is trying to disprove what I thought about pudendal neuralgia. So is there anything out there that will prove me wrong in my current supposition about pudendal neuralgia? So let's go and find what they suggest. And then, I'm opening up papers where I'm just like, this is an awful paper.
Right. Why is it an awful paper? What is it that makes it like just not worth the time? How do you scan that and be like, not bothering, not worth it?
So
that sounds really rude. I don't mean that to be rude to like the researchers and the right. Like I respect the work that goes into it, but the workload going into it doesn't necessarily equal worthwhile reading, right?
No. And look, I mean, it might be that this has no relevance to my search, so discard out there. And then, so this morning, what I was noticing is how medical the literature around pudendal neuralgia was. So it was so. I was reading about like nerve blocks and how sensitive they were in diagnosing neuralgia and things, and just noticing how limiting the perspective was for understanding pudendal neuralgia. It's a tongue twist. I never thought it was, but it isn't.
It's like phenomenology, So, but this is really cool because I can remember being a student and an early career physio that first year and looking for texts and being like, oh, that's too vague. There's no medical stuff in there. I'm going to read the medical stuff more. But as I've moved through my career, like you, like I'm thinking, oh, wait, that's way too reductionist. That's only going to give me a small vision on it. And that's not what I'm looking for right now. There's no human aspect there. I'm going to look for something that has a much broader perspective on the experience of pain.
Yeah, or it just says, I know that this is a direction that people might look, and the results in no way are surprising to me. So it doesn't reveal anything extra. It's not changing my worldview. So let's move on. Okay, next thing. Yeah.
So you specifically asking then for a paper to either, so you're not asking for something to confirm what you already know, which I think as an early career physio, I was always really glad when something confirmed what I already knew because it made me feel sort of safe. But maybe that was a misplaced safety, right? You're looking, when you're scanning a paper, you're looking for it to be surprising or unusual or different or move something on in a different or challenging.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, depending on what the process is, if you're writing a talk and you want to prove, you want something to support that you're saying this, and you're like, must have thought of this already. So, let's find an author that thinks the same as me. I mean, that's very different, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're thinking, I want to know about pudendal neuralgia, and I know a bit about neuralgias, I know about neuropathic pain, and actually my knowledge of pain mechanisms is reasonable. So I want something that's going to shake my knowledge, and so there we go. That's why.
But that is like, it's such a lovely thing. It sounds like nothing, but it is such a lovely thing to reflect on as a reading community that is invested in sort of like growing a clinical practice around a very, very complex experience, because being able to sort of, we're seeking out that sort of uncertainty in our reading rather than necessarily seeking out certainty, which I think is a very different perspective to bring to reading.
Yeah, I mean, there are other types of reading as well, aren't there? So you're talking about reading research and scientific literature, but popular science can fill in some gaps. So pick up a book about whatever it is, and you can fill in those gaps and create some confirmation bias there, there's different types of reading. And I was really, I mean, you probably anyway, I read a lot, and now I'm a bit more targeted with my reading, and now I wish my reading was a bit more targeted originally, because I think there was a bit of a scattergun approach, so I could have organized my knowledge a bit better.
Yeah, I think that's a really important like clinical skill though. Like we do have limited time. Our lives are full of lots of stuff, and when you're a student, your life isn't full of lots of stuff usually, or not often, right? And depending, not all students have a privileged way of moving through university. Some students have work and people to look after. But generally the assumption is that it's going to be a young adult that doesn't have loads of responsibilities, so they can just be like, wow, like they don't have to be selective, so they don't necessarily get taught the skill of being selective, and then they get into clinical practice and all of a sudden they've got no time, and they might read one paper a week. So how do they develop the skill of it being a high value paper that's going to bring their knowledge on? And that is what you're talking about, right? Like figuring out before you start reading, why am I reading? So what am I reading for? What are the what are the sort of slippery slopes I could fall into, like confirmation bias, and what does it feel like for me to be outside of a confirmation bias, right? Noticing that's a huge skill. I think that's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
it is, isn't it? I would go. So yeah, like you're saying, how do you pick that one paper? I don't know. I'm reflecting as you're talking, but I don't know whether it's important to read that one paper.
Yeah.
I think for me, the search is the important thing. Because if you do
Mm.
a really good search, then the breadth of knowledge you get from that search is phenomenal. So, like I said, you start. I mean, then you start realizing that there are certain research groups out there that are exploring this topic, and there's another research group that also explores this topic, but they use a slightly different term to describe what they're doing. So actually, that to me would come, but maybe I'm so biased now. But that
No,
would
I think you're right. Yeah.
come first for me. And I remember, I mean, geez, so people don't do this anymore, but you used to go to a library.
For what? No,
you,
I'm joking.
you
I love the library.
Then you'd go, I'd love love a library. You used to go to the library and then you'd go and you'd pick that whole lot of journals, you'd take a
Oh no, I don't have a memory of that. No, we were
you
digital.
flick through. Yeah, you'd flick through paper, you'd go
An
to
actual journal.
actual journal, and yeah, and then from that, then you might reach. So actually, I think I'm just a product of my, upbringing. That's how I learned to do stuff. So I still do it like that, but digitally now.
But I mean, I think maybe some like some skills are just they are just how it needs to be done, and I think you're probably right. Like when I think back to university, there was a sort of like moment where they were saying this is how you do a literature search. Your search is more important than like not more important, but it's as important as your reading, because it will direct your reading. It'll give you a sense of the land, and I think that's something that maybe as we move more digital and search engines become more user friendly in a way, right? They're better at predicting what you're going to be looking for all the time. You're slipping into algorithms, especially like Google Scholar, like where it's picking up your cookies all the time.
Yeah, and like the papers that perhaps are most revealing aren't necessarily the newest ones. So,
No.
there's a risk then that if you've limited your search to a particular time, you've missed some of the beautiful stuff.
The
Laura, there's
seminal
so much
texts.
more to say here, because like the other thing is actually we've missed so much thinking we should only look at current work. And actually I love the historical papers, and they're so
Yeah.
beautifully written.
Yeah.
It is like reading a novel or some prose, a poetry. And actually when you've done it, if you really have delved into a particular subject and you know some of the historical premise that this has been built on, when you start reading someone's introduction to their paper, you realize that they haven't grasped or they haven't read even sometimes some of the history. So then that's, you were saying, you know, what do you take from a paper and how do you discount it, is then if you know that, then that's annoying.
Yeah.
God's sakes, get your history right.
I tell you what, I was reading. So I did a podcast with Mira Eideder and Howard Fields the other day, and I was reading. Is it? I'm going to say it wrong. Meskie's papers. Is it Mexi? Oh,
Okay.
Like with the definition of pain, like that started thinking about psychiatric conditions and chronic pain and what it might mean, and the sort of like. And I was reading Mirsky, that's it. Mirsky, same thing. You say Mirsky, I say Mirsky, you know. Like reading their papers and being like, it was such a personal reflection, and there was so much of his like experience and what it meant to him to be in that moment with the other person, and it was so different to the way that papers are put together so often now, and like a real sort of like, you know, in a moment where you're like bringing in, and then talking about other people's work and how, in the narrative, in the dialogue of putting the paper together, it really is like an extension of the thinking process. And now it's like this whole, it's got a whole language about it, a whole, and it's a totally different experience.
It is, and there's a skill, isn't there, when you've read someone I think this is true for all of us. There are some papers you pick up and you just go, oh wow, that was easy to get through, and I from that, and there are others, and you're like, I'm trying to fight my way through this thing, and falling asleep after halfway, and then trying to wake yourself up and have a coffee and try and get through the rest of
it. Read.
So some people do write beautifully, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And it really inspires you. And I think, I don't know, I think that's the thing, that when I reflect back on some of my earlier student experiences of reading and like Pedro scales and all that stuff, like it took the joy out of it a little bit sometimes, because you constantly, like you're taught to read it I don't know, sometimes it's nice to just read a paper through and just think, that feels good, or that doesn't feel so good, or I'm struggling with this, or have an emotional response to it.
Yeah, that's where having a little guidance is helpful then, isn't it? If someone can steer you towards even the type of person who writes well on a topic, rather than, so that's an access point then, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're in there and you've delved a bit, and then you can delve into some of the more difficult to sort of navigate and wade through papers as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why, like, I think I always benefited from, like, this is why I think study groups are helpful, because knowing somebody else is suffering with you, like, can be also quite helpful, or knowing that there's going to be somebody to talk about it with. Like, we just last month we read 2 Friston papers. We got a bit fristy last month, as Polly Bongiorno told.
Any maths in them?
Yes, they had lots of that in it. And I was looking at this box, and it was just all equations, and I was like, this is what it looks like to like look at Viking runes or something. Like, it's a completely inaccessible for me anyway. But then it's amazing when you a few months later, after you've done it for a bit, and then you start to recognize what they mean and a bit more. Yeah. So
good on you, well done.
So what kind of, like, when you're reading a paper, do you like take notes alongside? Are you a highlighter? What do you do?
I take massive offense in anybody who highlights a paper.
Really?
Yes.
Do you not highlight? I am a highlighter. No, I'm a massive highlighter. I'm a highlighter. I'm a circler. I'm a sticker. Mick goes on me as well, because I write all over my books. I love an annotated book, or like a highlighted book and a
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hate it. So different. Because I know then you can't come back to the book afresh.
Um,
Afresh.
but you can't anyway because you've already read it.
Yeah, but you've forgotten that you've read it. You have anyway until you're halfway through and you went, oh, I remember.
Oh yes, I did read that. I remember that. Why am I reading it again?
I take notes. I have lots and lots of workbooks, and I have. Well, I don't know. Let's see whether there's a paper near. I take notes of everything.
Are you a quote writer? Do you write quotes down? What do you do? Like, how do you?
I'm going to show you if I can find one. It's been a bit of work in the process.
I mean, what's good to see is that they're always on hand. They're easily searchable.
This is my extended mind hypothesis for this living, breathing process. So basically, if I could find it somewhere in my pieces of paper, I take coloured notes. There's some.
Ah, okay.
Annotate. So there's a couple of papers there that I've been reading, and yeah. And then so I do circles. I like circles and lines and drawings and things, and
Yeah.
And then I write some stuff out, and the stuff I write out are my questions, and then occasionally quotes.
Right. That because this is so a reflective process is a really important part. Like, what is it that you're writing down? Are you just, are you writing? So this is why I highlight, because it stops me from writing down quotes. So if I highlight it, then it's sort of I remember where it's come from, and I can remember what the page looked like and what the highlight shape looked like, so I know where I can find it. But like, so then it leaves me freer to write down like what did it bring up in me, what was I unsure about, what did I not like, or what all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is the meaty bit, the nitty gritty of why
you ever go back to your quotes? You use them ever?
No, I'm not a quote person. I should be, shouldn't I? I think I will be. When I grow up, I might be. I'm not really. I have to keep.
I marvel at someone who can pull out a quote, and yeah, there are a few people. We know a few people like that, don't we? Mine tend to be sort of, yeah. It is like a narrative as well. It's like a narrative dialogue in me. So I'm saying, well, are you sure about this? And then let's see where that goes. And have you thought about this? Or I mean, in little bits like that. I wonder whether they've done this or.
Yeah, it's lovely though, isn't it? Because um, I I think that the reading bit is sometimes hard to know what you're supposed to be like. I can sit down with an article and a blank piece of paper, and I just sometimes don't really know what I'm supposed to be reflecting on. Like, am I just supposed to be like agreeing that yes or no, it's bad? But then actually the really interesting bit is, well, what questions are you left with? You've read this paper, what didn't they answer? What questions are left unanswered? And what are the problems that come up within the text? Like, is there any contradictions, or, you know, like what have you read that fits with this or doesn't fit with this? And you're starting to build up a kind of like constellation of evidence um, in the background, which is what you're describing as well, like knowing the different groups and what they're sort of working for. And I sometimes think about like when you're a new graduate, if you're a new graduate starting now, and we're talking about, I don't know, all the groups of people that have been working in pain over the years, and many of them are dead, and it's like they died before I qualified, and that is an inaccessible. Like, I'm not in the real time of that, so I have to build that world. I have to go back and build the world of pain research and know what all the groups were doing, because it is history. For like, Pat Wall's work is history, right? It's our history. And you can't just expect us to know that once we graduate. We have to go back and build that world up again.
Yeah. I remember, I mean, it's not something I've done for a long time now, but I remember when I was doing my master's, like creating, trying to create the links to topics and researchers and research groups and stuff. And so it was a very deliberate process, whereas now I feel, and then we were talking about reading, but there's nothing better than going and asking someone, go and, I mean, God, most people aren't dicks, and there's the odd one, but most people are all right about, you've emailed them or phone them or whatever. They'll give you a little bit of time, and that's it's amazing. So I actually went and visited people. So I went to Australia and spent some time in a couple of different labs. And I mean, Lorimer was amazing because he just invited me into the research group for a week, and
amazing.
Just sat in on the meetings, and you went and observed some of the experiments, and you could go off and do your own reading and whatever. And brilliant opportunity. So not sure that's
but I think that's right. I think people, like, one of the things that we're doing on Pain Geeks is we're like trying to bridge the gap, right? Like what you like the pub scientifique, right? The whole point is to bring the expert back into our, like, or to join worlds, right, between those things. So, like introducing us to not just the work, but the person behind the work and what motivates them and why they're doing it, equalizes us in a way, because we're all just trying to do the same thing. We're all just trying to understand this phenomena and figure out what we can do about it, right? And I think sometimes there's a mistrust that happens between clinician and researcher, because it feels like there's a big gap, like, you're not on the shop floor, you don't know what it's like, how does this update my work? Well, that's not the point of the researcher. They're not meant to be on the shop floor. They have a different role on the same problem, but they're still as committed to the same problem.
I mean, there are people who straddle that as well.
Yes, of course.
And it's getting a bit, the people are bringing in advocates and what have you now more knowingly. I mean, they have obviously been doing that, but I mean, the one thing about Le Pub has been wonderful is, when you get a researcher on, is people giving them questions that fuel further questions for them and their research, and that's often a bit of feedback. I'm sure you got that as well when you host on there, like, oh, it's been so good getting, these aren't the same questions that we get in the lab.
And that's what's been so lovely about being part of that, and seeing that was really inspirational and motivating, that it's a bi-directional relationship, right?
Totally.
So, any final tips or anything that you would say, like, is your one tip that you learned or you developed in terms of managing the reading? Or
do what suits you.
Do
what suits you. I don't know. I like reading. I've got loads of books, haven't I?
I've still got 2 of them. Need to give them back.
I buy books regularly, and I love reading, and I like the feel of flipping it through. It's sort of very much an active process for me. But I mean, I guess if I was like thinking of where you're at the moment, having some guidance is a great idea, and reflecting not just you but together, and hearing other people's reflect, and no one's right, it's just what you think, it's just what you took from that as well. So I don't know.
Nice.
Connect the people to the writing as well.
I think that's a really nice place to bring this to an end. So thank you very much for your time, Tim. And we'll see you soon.
I'll come again if you want me to come again.
Yeah, you're always welcome. Yeah. Okay, bye-bye.